All right, we're live. Hello, and welcome to the Seeking Context podcast, where we discuss beliefs and actions and what life experiences led us to hold those beliefs and inform the choices we've made. My guest today is American political activist David Mixner. David has been instrumental in advancing both the civil rights and gay rights movements in America. And today we're going to be discussing highlights from David's many years of activism, the lessons he's learned serving 6 US presidents, his views on the current state of American politics, and how David's spiritual life informs and underpins his passions and life pursuits. David, welcome to the Seeking Context podcast.
You forgot two things.
So much for joining me.
Said like 6 decades of service. That's another way of just saying I'm old. and the other thing is you forgot the most important criteria. We're longtime friends.
That is true. It is a pleasure to have you back as a friend and learn more about your storied career and life.
I'm thrilled to be here, Justin.
Cool. So to start, I want to give our audience a little bit of context about how kind of your lifetime of activism has personally impacted me. And so in 1992, you successfully campaigned for President Clinton. And there's a picture of you at a fundraiser and then on the campaign trail. And that was the same year that technical details, let me figure this out. There we go. Entered the U.S. Air Force Academy. And
you look so young there.
Oh, it's so green. I was excited to start my great journey. So skinny. And so that was 92. And then in 1993, President Clinton signed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell legislation into law. So that was an imperfect policy that at least allowed me to serve my country with honor so long as I kept my personal life a secret. And he also signed the Defense of Marriage Act into law in 1996, which was, coincidentally, the year I graduated from the Air Force Academy and then was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force. Now, paradoxically, you spent the next 20 years fighting alongside other activists to overturn 2 signature pieces of legislation signed by the man you helped elect. And I want to show this picture, which is David Mixner being arrested in front of the Clinton White House. And I think this is 93, if I'm not mistaken.
This is 93. Clinton and I were roommates at Oxford.
Okay.
Dear friends and longtime friends. So this was a difficult moment for both of us.
Can't imagine the courage and strength of character it takes to protest the policies of one of your best friends who you helped win the presidency. It's amazing to me. But it didn't, the policy still went forward, and it took, 20 years to get past Don't Ask, Don't Tell and DOMA, because it wasn't until 2015 when Obergefell v. Hodges, when that ruling came down, the Supreme Court struck down Section 2 of DOMA, guaranteeing a right to marriage for same-sex couples nationwide. And so 1 week later, on the 4th of July, I exercised that right in a joyous ceremony with friends and family from around the world. So, David, the two of the most meaningful experiences in my life, my Air Force career and my marriage, were made possible through decades of activism by you and others seeking to change policy at the highest level on behalf of your fellow man. So truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your many years of service to this country. And, I've shared a couple of highlights from moments in my life that were enabled by your generation's sacrifices. And I wanted to start out by asking, after 60 years of activism in American politics, can you tell me some moments that really stand out for you?
Well, I grew up, I was born in 1946, so a good deal of my life was in the 50s. And my experience with being a person who happens to be gay was a nightmare. It was against the law for us to be public or gather. It was against the law for me to run for office. It was against the law for me to, there was no job protection. I could not have children. I couldn't get married. I couldn't serve my country. So my country defined for me my path in some way, because it took almost an enormous amount of options that any other young person would be able to have dreams about, serving their country or being an openly gay person in the entertainment field or running for office or raising a family. All of those dreams were erased from me. I knew I could not have any of those dreams at the time. And so I threw myself heavily into politics. In 1960, John Kennedy was the first person I worked for. And said, if I can't have those dreams for myself, I will devote my focus on making dreams come true for others.
Wow, cool.
And I ended up working for John Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy and a lot of people.
What was it like to lose all three of those political giants?
Well, there's, for those of you who are old enough who are listening, it was a little bit like what it was like after 9/11 or this past week on June 6th, when if there was any American with any sense of patriotism would have been horrified, no matter what party, what ideology, or what one's personal ideological beliefs are. It was an attack at the symbol of democracy. And it turns out that what I first thought was an attack, a riot, was a organized attempt at a coup to take democracy away from us, dispute the results of an election that are well documented at this stage. And you're horrified. You're horrified. You can't believe at first what you're seeing, and then you try to downplay it in your head because it's just too shocking to deal with it. And then as this week has gone on, you become more and more horrified as you hear the stories of our law enforcement officers who were brutally beaten and threatened their lives, and one died. And then it becomes not just a riot, but an actual proven coup attempt in America. In America. This is the sort of things I've done human rights work all my life. This is the sort of thing I expect in Africa. Right. When I fly to Africa to do human rights work or do work with wildlife, these are the things I witnessed there, not in America. We were like a third world republic last Monday.
Yes. I guess having the experience of Kennedy and Martin Luther King and the Vietnam War and these other periods of extreme division, is this echoes of that?
It is. I mean, there are moments in history that generations will say, "Where were you?" When I was growing up, I'd hear my parents. I was born just 6 years after Pearl Harbor, and I would listen to that generation relive Pearl Harbor. Where were you? What happened to your life? And when John Kennedy was assassinated, I was a junior in high school, and it was, where were you? And I was devastated, absolutely devastated, because this was the first person in my life to, as a young man, to capture my imagination, to say that we belong not just in America, but to a planet, know, and to actually create the Peace Corps. And he inspired all of us as young people, which led us to believe that people should be free and we shouldn't be silent. And, he would give these articulate speeches about the role of the artist. I'm a writer and a performer in creating change. And it's one of my favorite speeches of his of all time. It was this last speech, actually, at Amherst. So you're devastated, and you remember the feelings and the pain and the shock and how you had to process it and not just check out, And then, Dr. King, 68 was a tough year for this country. It was a year when in May of 68, 5,000 young men, because it was mostly men at that time, women were not allowed to serve in battle. In 1 month, in May of 1968, died in Vietnam. 4 members of my family, didn't make it. And, it was a year that many of us, the images, all these elite students in the street. Well, I went to Arizona State. I was a sports person. I was far from elite. Come from a what would be known as a poor family. I worked my way up. But you go to a funeral of your best friend from high school or your cousin or close relative, and it changes minds. You remember. And the interesting thing about 68 compared to today, it's interesting. It was one of the most turbulent years in our history. You had Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy was shot. We had the riots in the street in Chicago where I was beaten badly by the police and on crutches for 3 years. We had great division around the war in Vietnam. Thousands of people in the streets, difficulties, property damage, people died. But never once in that process, never once did any of us as protesters or dissidents or those who disagreed with the war, did any of us believe, and I don't think anyone else in the country believes, I can't speak for them, but my family I can speak for, and I certainly know how they felt, doubted that this was anti-democratic, that this, with a small d, that this was a threat to our Constitution. Nor did we think our president would ignore the Constitution, which he didn't. We didn't think Nixon was a threat to the institutions of everything that every American holds dear that we've been brought up. I mean, I was brought up in a small country school where we said to pledge allegiance to the flag every day, and we had a Jehovah's Witness who doesn't believe in pledging to anything except God. We didn't persecute him.
Right.
He was our friend, and the teachers took responsibility, not saying you got to stand up or anything like that. They said, Joe thinks differently. And his religion, his belief in God, tells him only to pledge to God. It took time to tell us this in 4th grade.
That's a good lesson. We had the same thing here in Oakley.
Yeah, and so we never doubted our country or our Constitution in one of the most turbulent years since the Civil War in 1968 or the Great Depression. Never doubted that our Constitution would guide us all through as a united nation eventually. The shocking thing to me in this last year, I wondered if our Constitution would survive. In the first time in 60 years, I wondered if we would get through with it intact. And I wondered whether we had a person who probably had never read the Constitution, tampering with it in every way possible, pushing it to its limits, and which resulted in the end of these 4 years of division and hate and giving permission to act out without responsibility of taking for your actions. Now listen, I've been to jail 15 times for civil rights and human rights. Every single time I pleaded guilty, and I was willing to go to jail because I took responsibility for my actions. I went to jail because I wanted people to know that I would make a peaceful sacrifice in order to educate them, to make them think that, why is David doing this? But never once did I try to get out of the sentence. Never once did I not take responsibility and said, yes, they had every right to arrest me. Yes, that's where I belong. But I am willing to make that sacrifice for my country. These people get arrested and they whine. Oh, I was just following blindly. I didn't know what I was doing. Well, it turns out today we know that they were planning to assassinate elected officials in the Capitol. The FBI told us today. Man up. Take responsibility for your actions. Don't whine. Stand with dignity and tell us why you thought this was important. Oh, they're whining and hiding and blaming everyone else, starting with our president. I'm rambling on. So
it's difficult not to get caught up with these events. I'm curious, setting aside the well, maybe not even setting aside, just looking back on your years of activism, do you have any particular lessons you learned?
Yeah, for you youngins, of course, everyone's younger than I am right now. I think the first and most important, three lessons. One is never, ever hate and do violence, because it makes civilized dialogue impossible. It divides us into groups, whether it's race or ethnic or religion. Anytime we've saw nations, as I've worked over the 60 years, whether it's Ireland or Senegal or Ivory Coast or the Congo, most of the most bloody conflicts, Kosovo, were based on ethnic or racial distrust. And so they were, like in Rwanda, killed 800,000 people based on tribe. And those tribes were based on height, based on what the Belgians decided, that the taller ones would be the most powerful ones and the shorter ones would be the least powerful. And 800,000 people, as the result of that policy, died in Rwanda in a genocide. So there's no room in life for that. Another one is avoid self-righteousness. There is no answer. The fact of the matter is, when I get self-righteous, and there's times to get self-righteous, and this is one of them this week. I think people who are willing to attempt a legitimate coup against our way of government should be punished heavily and shown no mercy. I think that let me get rid of this call. Brendan, I'll be right back to you. I think, people pound the table and say, we have the answer and there's only one way, and anyone who disagrees with us is either a fascist or a communist or a socialist or a capitalist. How can you talk if you're rigid in your beliefs? So you have to look. Maybe I disagree with you 90% on most things, but somewhere in that 90%, there's 10% obviously where we agree.
Right.
So that's a good building block. Start not where you disagree the most, but where you can reach common ground. And that dialogue will lead to a more open society and a less divided one. There is the third thing I want to say, there is no such thing as the truth. When I grew up, I was told there were only 9 planets and only 9 planets. It turned out one isn't even a planet. And according to science today, there could be 1 trillion planets out there, solar systems out there. Columbus thought the world was flat. That was true, and everyone subscribed to it. But the fact of the matter is, I woke up this morning with a certain belief on what Monday was and got a whole lot of knowledge. And by the end of the day, I have a different view of what Monday was and the penalties that people should pay for that. Because I got knowledge. I didn't resist anybody's new knowledge. I listened to it, discarded some, laughed at some, realized I was wrong on some assumptions. Not often, though. But in the end, I had new information that enabled me to carry it into the next day and more honestly receive the information I'm going to get tomorrow. And I guess the last one that I would say, lessons for you youngins, is live your life the way you want to see the world be. So if you believe that all people should be treated equal, that we should love one another, that we should be good neighbors. Where I grew up, probably like there in Kansas, neighbor's barn burned down and the whole community would show up the next day and rebuild it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just what you did. And if you only had 2 blankets and it was cold and you both were poor, you gave one of those blankets to the neighbors. And that's living your life as the way you want to see the world be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you want people to have fun in life, if you want people to have a great family life, if you want people to be happy, then you yourself have to have all of that. You know,
Yeah.
If I get so almighty important and I cease to have the benefits of life myself in some sort of martyr complex so that I'm giving all this up for you, I'm not going to know what I'm talking about. I'm going to come across as a cold ideologue.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of a man who's had a lot of fun, who's had a lot of love in his life, and allowed people in and to be vulnerable. So if you use helping others, which 60 years of my life has been about, as an excuse to not have a personal life, then you're not going to be heard. You're going to come across as cold and rigid and exclude people from your life. You know, I believe that we must live life on the edge. I have a fear of heights, so I think of a big cliff, you know, like in the movies where cars go down and explode at the end. And I just think you have to go where I have to walk through my fear to look at the best sunset I've ever seen and be on the edge of that cliff where the sand's coming down underneath your cowboy boots. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And look at the sunset. Because by the law of physics, no one can be in front of you, right? They'll fall. And so you will see colors of the sunset that no one else can see because you're in front. And the choice in life is to walk through your fear and you be the one to describe the colors of the sunset to other people, or to live in fear and have other people tell you what sunsets are.
That's great. Well, David, you've certainly lived the values that you just described in my experiences with you. And you've also had such a rich career. You've worked kind of at the highest levels of government. You've advised half a dozen presidents in the United States.
In the Oval Office, one-on-one.
Some of those, like, did any of your experiences with the President of the United States stand out in terms of your experience and why?
Yeah, you know, and let's just take 3 of them. The first would be John Kennedy, of course, inspired me. Mm-hmm. And maybe 4 of them. And then actually Ronald Reagan, I had a number of meetings with him one-on-one about AIDS. Mm-hmm. We disagreed on practically everything. But without a doubt, he is the one president that treated me so kind and so wonderfully, even though I thought his policy on HIV and AIDS was killing people. It just showed me that, and we had a great conversation that led to great results, by the way, because he was so open to receive information. And it was a very educational meeting for me. Look, my favorite president probably is Barack Obama in my 60 years. Mm-hmm. You know, I started with presidents, knowing of presidents since Harry Truman. So what is that, 9 or 11 presidents I've seen in my lifetime? Barack Obama was one of the most articulate, inspiring people. I thought he could have done better. But what is better?
Tough bar.
Well, it's a tough bar for anyone to surpass what he did. And he did it without one person being indicted in 8 years. Not one scandal in 8 years. Never did he embarrass us or make us ashamed of him. Never did he put anyone down to sell a policy. Mm-hmm. One of the most brilliant, intelligent, honest men I have seen in my lifetime.
Why did you get involved? Well, I mean, you kind of told us at the start, but like, how did you get your start into the political world?
You know, sort of by accident. I'm Irish Catholic,
Mhm.
and I have a deep belief system. Um, uh, and my theological philosophy, which is principles and values and beliefs are different from issues.
Yeah.
Issues come and go. I can change my mind on climate change tomorrow. You know, I can change my mind, and and that's just because I got information that challenged my beliefs. But principles and values should never disappear or change. I had very strong principles about how I look at other individuals and love and the planet as we are guardians of the planet.
Mhm.
And it came a lot from my faith. And I am a liberation theologist, which is Saint Romero of El Salvador was the father or the poster cardinal for liberation theology, which it sounds complicated, but it's real simple. I can describe it to you in one line. We are put on earth by God to do one thing, to serve and take care of others.
That's a good philosophy.
It's back in vogue because Pope Francis is a liberation theologist, whereas Benedict and John Paul try to put it out. And for 60 years, I have worked with that basic tenet underlining my life. I have a few things like that sentence. I have dedicated my life to living that sentence and have done so without fail. Sometimes very popular, right now, very popular, and sometimes viewed as a villain. Sometimes making huge mistakes, which I owed up to, and sometimes having great success. But there's an old quote by a physicist and a Nobel Prize winner for peace named Bertrand Russell. He was the only Nobel Prize winner who won the Peace Prize and the prize for. And old Bertie said, 3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life: the search for knowledge, the longing for love, and the unbearable pity for the suffering of others. And that's sort of been my life journey. It's been based on all of that. And it's taken me to places I didn't think I would go in human rights work in Africa, especially with the Dutch government. It's taken me to places that my values and principles, and having to make decisions that would be viewed by courageous by others, that I paid a heavy price for, such as going to jail. I couldn't work for 4 years because I was put on a blacklist by the Clinton administration for getting arrested. I was selling my wristwatches at pawn shops, literally, to pay my rent. And it took everything I had in me to keep my faith that this was part of the journey, that I needed to be humbled, to reflect, also just to see who my friends were. And, but it wasn't courageous, because you know what courage is? How I define courage? A lack of options. A jetliner falls in the water and passengers are trying to get to shore. Grown people dive in with their clothes on in very hazardous cases in a second to help others. I say that person had no option if they were going to live with themselves or that were a person of God.
Right.
So the things I did because I had run out of options.
But you persevered.
I have went through some very difficult times. I've been beaten a lot in my work for my beliefs, sometimes brutally. And I have been, like I said, viewed as the devil sometimes and viewed as a savior at times. What I am is just me.
Yeah.
And my personal life is every bit as important to me as my public life. And I say to my friends, do you mind if I go on a little bit?
No, please continue.
You know, your friends love you. So they don't want something bad to happen to you. So when you decide that you have to exercise what they view as a risky venture for oneself, or a courageous, in their mind, venture for oneself, they try to pull you back from that edge.
Mm-hmm.
Out of love, but it's also makes everybody uncomfortable because the very reason to be on that edge is to bring people closer to that edge so they can see the sunsets for themselves. And a lot of people want us, come up to me and say, David, you got to say this, or David, you got to say that. Senators, presidents have said that to me. And I have a very quick response all my life. I really appreciate the love that you're showing for me and the caring, but you don't have a vote. My life is a dictatorship of one. And I will be responsible for my failures, and I'll be willing to take a bow for my successes. But I can't allow my life, either publicly or privately, to become a place of the lower common denominator or consensus in order to feel safe and loved.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be willing to be shunned and unloved and comfortable in my personal beliefs as I am to accept praise.
Well, did you have a tough time squaring your personal life with the teachings of the Catholic Church, or within liberation theology? Is that an area that wasn't difficult for you?
I had a very tough time coming out of the closet. I didn't come out until I was 30. I had been blackmailed. When I was growing up, if you were a member of the LGBTQ plus community, parents by the thousands would put their teenage or young 20s children into mental institutions for being gay, and they would have forced lobotomies. We had a place in California that was called, I'm blanking on the name, but it was a big mental hospital, Ascadero. And they performed 4,000 lobotomies in 1 year on gay and lesbian people without their approval. And there's the head of the institution we used to call Dr. Icepick, because they just basically would jam metal objects into your brain to cure you of homosexuality. It was a scary time. If you'd have a dinner party with other gays, nothing sexual or anything like that, but just a dinner party in Los Angeles, it was considered an illegal gathering for immoral purposes. And they would raid your house, and line you up against the wall because we weren't allowed to gather, because if we gathered as friends, it was an immoral meeting.
Yeah.
And so it was a very tough time. And I knew a lot of the people I knew some people who were the victims of that lobotomy, and threw myself into their life to help them out. And it was horrifying. And, you have to fight the desire to be angry and strike out. But anger is the tool of the devil. Mm-hmm. And I have so far avoided that most of my life. But, it was a time they firebombed a bar in the 1970s in New Orleans, and 27 patrons died to death. And then none of the churches in New Orleans would allow any of the funerals to take place. Mm-hmm. And some families refused to claim the bodies of the 27 because they were shamed that they had been identified as an LGBTQ plus person. And there's a cemetery in New Orleans where they buried the people where no one wanted the bodies. Now, I was part of a group that tried to get howard those bodies so we could give them decent burials and services and so forth. And they're buried with no markers. We don't know where they're buried in that cemetery. Officials took the bodies, buried them in mass, of the ones that weren't claimed, and we have no idea where they are in that cemetery. Yeah. And you know, there was one church during that period, and I was active then in the community, somewhat closeted, no, very closeted. But I remember going, there was one black church that Reverend Troy Perry and a man named Morris Kite, pioneers in our movement, got to allow us to use for a memorial service for all of them. But we couldn't announce it publicly and put out a press release about it or anything. And that's the only way they would do it. The Archbishop of the Catholic Church wouldn't allow any of them to be services to be held in any Catholic church in Louisiana. And we all went. I went not as an organizer, but as a participant. Didn't know any of the people back then. Later worked closely with both of those gentlemen. And I remember Reverend Perry coming to the podium, and it was packed. And I would say 90% of the people in that church were closeted and would lose their jobs if their employer knew that they were there. Not any hyperbole at all, just a fact. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Perry got up at one time and said, someone has called the press. And we know that we told you there would be no press. And they're lined up outside. So we've arranged for the church for all of you to leave by the back door in small groups so that you will not be filmed.
Wow.
And there was this stunned silence over the church. And I don't know who she was, but I knew she was a lesbian, a woman. Shouted out, I came in the front door and I'm going out the front door. And there was a moment of silence, and then everyone started cheering and we went out the front door.
For a lot of people, I've met many, the church's approach, the example you gave of the Catholic Church, their experience with the church is one that has caused their family to reject them, their community to reject them. And in turn, they reject the church and faith altogether. But you, through living through the same time period,
let me just get that and turn it off. Kevin, I'll call you back. Sorry about that. I don't know how to turn that phone down. I played with it before.
You're popular. It's fine.
Exactly. I mean, it might be a date, and I don't want to turn it down. You know, they don't come by easy.
No, COVID doesn't allow a lot of that. I was just curious, like, you know, there's so many, when you experience something like that, it's easy to understand how people walk away from the church and view the church as a force for evil, at least as the way they experience it. But that did not impact your personal convictions or faith.
I think organized religion can be one of the most dangerous things around in the wrong hands. Mm-hmm. And that is God's building, not an individual's building, not a group of individuals. And my relationship with God is one-to-one. And God wouldn't have made me who I am if that's not who he wanted me to be. Good and bad.
Amen.
And I've always been comfortable with that. I stopped going to organized services for a while. But with Pope Paul, I have started going back. Mm-hmm. But there's only one relationship that's important in that church, whether it's packed or half empty. And that's my relationship with my God. And if someone objects to it, it's none of their business. If someone objects to me sitting there, I don't care. Again, they don't have a vote. If they get ugly because I'm allowed to worship in a particular building, that's their problem. That's the minister's problem, not my problem. I'm not doing anything wrong. I've come to worship my God. it's really important that we don't take on the charges, the accusations, the myths of our oppressors, and start explaining why we're not that. The moment you start explaining, well, I'm not that person, or I'm not that kind of gay, or I'm not, that fat, then that becomes the issue. And all you do is end up explaining what you're not.
Right.
And we were created by God's grace, and we do not have to explain why he recreated me like I am. If they have a problem and can't understand the word of the God I worship, that's their problem. They don't have a vote. I respect it. I wouldn't take their right to say it away. I'm not that kind of person. I believe, if the Klan wants to march up the street, I couldn't disagree with more. I'd sit in to stop them from marching. I'd go to jail to stop them. But they have a right to do it in peace. And the difference between that and what happened on June 6th, it was one of the most violent, ugly things I've seen since Chicago 68. The difference was we didn't try to overturn the government. We disagreed with her policy and were willing to pay the penalty. They were out to force their beliefs, to take away my country, to take away my constitution, to take away my rights, to enforce their beliefs on the world in a violent, ugly, destructive way that could lead to a civil war that hundreds of thousands of Americans could have died in. Who do they care about? What is so important to do that? Donald Trump? Gag me.
Yeah. You're a passionate person, David.
Yes.
All
things. You should see me in the bedroom.
Well, so, maybe.
Married, so.
What other passions? What are your passions in life outside of things we've talked about so far?
Hands down, wildlife. I'm a big animal person. I believe and adore animals. I've been on 25 safaris in Africa. I go to Africa all the time for human rights, mostly to sneak off and see the animals, but also to do the right thing. I'm a big cat person, ranging from lions to pussycats. I love animals, and animals are a great passion with me, and saving endangered species are a great passion of mine. And with great dismay to my family, who were big hunters, I'm against killing animals. And look, I know there are societies where people are hungry and they have no choice. That's courageous, and I'm not condemning that. But to get and build a stands in the jungle and have a guide chase an elephant to you and kill it and then pose for it as a trophy, and take the ivory, and they don't take the meat to the village, is obscene to me. My daddy hunted deer and it fed us for many winters. I understand that. But sport killing of endangered species, I think, is one of the most obscene things in the world, to pose with an elephant or a lion. Listen, I went to Africa for the first time in 1980, I think, or earlier. 78 maybe, I can't quite remember. Never ask an old person to be specific about a year. That just really frustrates them. That's another lesson I can impart. And I remember that I would see on my first trip to Africa herds of elephants that were 500-600 strong. In Tsavo in Kenya, for example, I would just sit there and they would come and come and come, and lions everywhere. And
that must have been amazing.
It was. And that was 40 years ago. I go to Africa, and if I see a herd of elephants of over 30, I'm thrilled. And we're killing who we are. We're killing our planet through climate change, through not taking care of just as much as God created me, God created them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a great, great passion I have. Writing. I've had, and performing, I've had 3 best-selling books, 2 of them hitting #1. I've had 5 shows off Broadway where it's a one-man show with some singing and storytelling, and they've all sold out and got great reviews. And I've performed in Milan and Los Angeles and Chicago and Atlanta, and the 5 performances off Broadway. And I love it.
Are we going to see any performances after COVID if we get back?
It takes a lot of energy to put on a show.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I'm very fortunate because I made all the proceeds go to the Ali Forney Center, which is a group that provides home and shelter and education to homeless LGBTQ plus youth. And we've raised well over $1 million, $1.5 million for that. And it was fun doing it because we had very prominent, award-winning Broadway singers and actors like Michael Urie and Bobby Staggert and other Tony winners, and Dave Koz, who's a 9-time Grammy nominee, performing the shows with me. And it was great joy, great fun. And so that's been a passion of mine. So writing and performing right up there. I think animals. I love my sexuality. You know I'm not supposed to say that, you know, some mouths just drop. But I have never done anything I was ashamed of. I have spent a lifetime fulfilling fantasies. And, you know, the interesting thing about fulfilling fantasies, and not going into specifics, but it's an important thing for everyone to consider in their private life, how they look at sexuality. We all have one, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have imaginations.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us are taught that what we're imagining in sexuality, you should be ashamed of and you fear judgment. My experience is if you are open and communicate, that about 50% of my fantasies were moments that I'll never forget in my life. There was a special type of bonding between men that I never dreamed was possible. 50% of my fantasies were a joke. I couldn't stop giggling. You know, I couldn't, everything I thought it would be, none of that existed. And I just laughed at myself saying, what was I thinking? You know, boy, did my imagination leave me down there. But I didn't regret exploring it. I didn't regret getting that knowledge. And, you know, a famous elected official, I will protect his identity. We were having dinner one night. He was a senator, U.S. senator, and he said, after world hunger, I think sexuality, not dealing with heterosexuality or homosexuality, but sexuality, causes more pain than anything else. It's a source of divorce. It's a source of domestic violence. It's a source of judgment and shame. And, you know, he said, if people just would learn, even starting at the basic, just to communicate what your needs are, what your fantasies are, then you can discuss whether as a couple or you know, someone you're seeing, whether you'd like to be supportive and exploring that together, but the most important thing is not to say, oh my God, how could you think that? You're lower than life, you're a shameful person. You know, sex is only for creating children. Well, I don't know. I don't have any kids. I wasn't, by law, I wasn't allowed to adopt. So if that was the case, I should have entered the priesthood. You know? Yeah. But I had no desire to be celibate. So it's very important that we not be afraid to talk about it with each other. Mm-hmm. It's very important to communicate with people you love and say you trust more than anyone else in the world, and talk about it. Now, doesn't mean you reach agreement, doesn't mean you won't separate, doesn't mean you won't divorce, but at least you've had the conversation.
Right.
You know,
bottled up and feel
lots of times I've talked to psychologists who tell me that domestic violence usually arises when someone is carrying a shameful secret, fear of the judgment, and needs to feel powerful and strong in spite of it and take it out on those they love. And just to be clear, domestic violence is not only a woman issue. There are men who have been raped. There are men who have been beaten by their female partners and their male partners and brutally injured. And that's another myth, because if we say men have been raped and men have been abused by a woman, that somehow makes them weaker. Where if a woman, she's a victim. So I mean, it's important to talk about that, because there's so much shame around a man admitting that he's been raped, brutally raped, and I've known some of them, or that they were abused by their female spouse, that there's no organizations for them. There's no programs. They get laughed at police stations. So we got to bring that to light and give them a sanctuary, as we offer very important sanctuaries to women who are abused and their children.
So taking your passions, all of your life experiences, we touched on it earlier, but man, David, how do you view the events of our modern world with your lifetime of experience?
I have lived with presidents that I have had vehement disagreements with, have had thoughtful conversations with, both Republican and Democrat. I have fought hard for a progressive voice in the Democratic Party, but also to be practical. We get too rigid, self-righteous. There's only one reason to have a movement for justice, a movement for peace, a movement to save the family farm. And that is, the purpose of a movement is to find the words and your actions that will enable you to expand the circle of those who want to join you. And you can't expand that circle if you offend people. You can't expand that circle if you don't value your words as much as your actions. Otherwise, why are you doing it? To prove that you're better than anyone else? To, be a great leader and have people sing their praises of you? No. The movement is to change minds and to make a better world, to reach a place where you can live more in agreement than disagreement. And I got to say, up until Trump's election, I felt that we had been very successful on both sides in doing that. If you just take the gay stuff, Bill Clinton chickened out on it. But 10, 20 years later, we built a movement, and in a way that others were eventually to join us, our parents, our neighbors. They come to our weddings now. They come to our funerals now.
Just took time.
Yeah, and we were successful. And in large part because we kept extending that openness, that willingness to let their harmful and hateful words roll off our back and still say we love you. I had a partner, and he died of AIDS. My father didn't allow him in the house, didn't want anything to do with him, but eventually got to know him. My mother ended up loving him, and no one wept more than my sister at his funeral. And none of that would have happened 10 years before.
Right.
And so don't forget why we're doing this. It is not to prove that you're right. It's not to have some sort of fulfillment at the expense of others. It is to sacrifice yourself for a greater good, that you choose your words that could be hurtful to others and eliminate them. You choose your actions that will inspire people to at least think. The reason I was willing to block roadways and get arrested was I knew my family and my circle of friends who loved me would have to deal with, why did I do that? And they might in the end say, he's crazy. Don't see it at all. And that's fine. On the other hand, we had that conversation.
Right. David, I understand that you pray every morning.
Do the rosary and pray every morning.
What it is that you pray?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm blessed. Over the 60 years, I've seen the best and the worst, and I end up here. I've had 8 stays in critical care the last 10 years and fooled them every single time. Got the last rites 4 times, fooled them again. Got COVID, fooled them again. I'm not going anywhere in the near future. And I'm blessed. And I'm a life filled with friends who love me and I love them and who like to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I go on vacation, I don't keep my cell phone on because I'm so important and I'm indispensable for the world continuing.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I shut it off. And but I need to express my thanks. And I need to get in touch with every morning who I am and what my role is. And so I do the rosary and then I say the prayer. And the prayer is quite simple. I say, Dear God, thank you for another day. And I know this day could possibly be filled with dark and bloody rocks or filled with sunshine and blooming flowers. All that I ask is that you this day also include a moment of joy, no matter how dark and bloody, and that and to give me the wisdom not to miss that moment of joy. Amen.
Well, I hope that your prayer is answered every day.
I haven't missed a moment of joy, but there's been some shitty days.
It's human.
There's been days with dark and bloody rocks. Inevitable for all of us. But I can wake up and have the knowledge that what my options in life are right now and look for the moment of joy every day. I've been on lockdown for a year. I want an ankle bracelet from the cops. At least that would feel sexy. But, you know, people said, oh, you must be depressed being in that. I have a apartment with Mount Grove, a lovely place, big screen TV. You must be so depressed in this epic pandemic, and I've lost family and friends to it. Got it myself. I said, no, not at all. Because I come from a time where people from my friends from high school, my best friend, went to Vietnam into rain-soaked tropical jungles and fought the most awful battles at 17 and 18 and 19, many of them never returning home.
Mm-hmm.
All my government, my family members served in World War II. All my government is asking of me that I lock down. Don't like it particularly, but I've seen every movie on Netflix and Amazon Prime. That I wear a mask and I wash my hands. What the hell? I mean, that's all they're asking me, to help my neighbor to do those 3 things so we can come and deal with this horrendous pandemic. And because as a nation, we did not come together like we did after 9/11, that we did not come together like we did after the assassination of our beloved John Kennedy. We did not have the president who called upon the better sides of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We had people who would quit their jobs if the president asked and come work full time to take care of our sick and dying. As a result of not having that, we're having the largest death toll per capita in the world. And by next week, 400,000 of our neighbors will have died of this in less than a year. Now, to put that in perspective, that's greater than World War II and World War I combined over 7 years.
Yeah.
And so I feel blessed that my government is only asking me to sacrifice wearing a mask, not to become a burden upon society by doing everything I can not to become sick again, to wash my hands, which I did anyhow, and to rise to the level of caring about your neighbor and loving your neighbor as I love myself. That's all they've asked of us. And we haven't done it. And if we had done it, about 200,000 of those people would be alive today. That's the greatest tragedy in our history. It goes right up there with the unbelievable death per capita in the Civil War. It has, and that was 4 years. And we're going to pass the death toll in the Civil War soon. And no one has summoned the better angels in us. In fact, they've created fear and suspicion and turned nothing more than a disease that people have experienced throughout history, whether it's the plague or the Spanish flu or polio. They politicalized for personal power and left us to die. And this nation has never done that before. There's been disagreements, people who didn't think we should go into World War II. But when our nation, in the end, faced a crisis, they responded.
Well, we have to fix it ourselves.
We have to come together as a people again, find the better angels in us. And I think Joe Biden can bring that out in us because he has suffered greatly on his life journey. He knows pain. He knows death. And I think having gone through a lot of it myself, that has a profound impact on how you view life.
Well, I hear that you are getting the vaccine soon.
Hopefully in the next week. I mean, I'm 74 and a half. I have COPD and a few other ailments, so I have pre-existing conditions. I'm a sweetheart. Look at this. By the way, I'm single, anyone.
Soon going to have the vaccine. You're going to be.
I'm raring to go.
Well, I'm going to have to come visit you in New York and throw a party for you if you ever come to Southern California.
Well, you promised me on both things. So if I did the show, so you'd be no better than Trump in keeping your word if you don't.
All right, I booked my ticket. Where's Kayak? I'm on now. Thanks so much
Thank you for having me on your show. This has been such an honor and such fun to do with such a good friend.
I agree. It's been a joy to speak with you again. I'm glad that you came through your COVID experience and that, I think brighter days are ahead and that your lessons for people are profound, and I hope they hear them.
And I hope you have the best life journey as good as I have and have lots of fun in the process.
I'll try.
This has been fun.
Thanks a lot, David.
All right. Much love to you.
You too. Bye.